Americans are unhappy, and it's showing in the polls. Even with more than 150 million registered voters, it sure looks like many of us aren't excited to see who wins a rematch between former President Trump and the incumbent President Biden. Things are now coming down to the wire as we go along 2024. A very important year for both Democrats and Republicans. But in reality, some people are saying that it's much more important for Americans because this is a point in time where we could change the course of history. That is, if whoever's in charge will actually deal with the many problems that we have right now. Now, it's also worth noting that before we begin, Trump looks to be going into this thing at a disadvantage, believe it or not. But even with this handicap, he's still supposedly showing up in the ballots. Now, before I even get into this, do me one favor. It only takes a second. Drop a quick like for the video. I really appreciate you guys. All right, so let's go and jump in. So get this, right? So Nikki Haley lost to Donald Trump in the Republican primaries out in Nevada. And remember what I said about a disadvantage? Well, Trump wasn't even on the ballot. How the heck did that happen, right? Meanwhile, President Joe Biden clinched the Nevada primary with a mere 14% of voter turnout and even fewer Democrats in the mix. Now, it's got me wondering right now, are Americans just resigned to voting for the same old politicians that we've already got? Do you think that many Americans feel stuck with the same roster? Now, it's really tough to gauge from these primaries given how low the voter turnout was. And it really shows how most Americans feel about the 2024 presidential elections. Not much optimism if we go by the turnout. But let's go over the Nevada Republican primary results from early February, okay? So Nikki Haley got 30% of Republican voters, but a whopping 63% or 43,000 votes opted for the option to vote for none of these candidates.
The winner in Nevada's primary, technically no one.
I'm on the fence with nobody.
That's literally who won. Nobody. The option that says none of these candidates. And that's seen as a win for former President Trump, who wasn't even on the ballot. The primary last night, remember, was only symbolic for Republicans. It's the caucuses tomorrow that count toward the 26 delegates at stake in this state, and Donald Trump's all but certain to lock up those. But Trump backers, who pushed the none of the above option, hoped to deny Haley even just the bragging rights of a symbolic win.
Theoretically, a symbolic win could have given her another lifeline, but losing to none of the above ends up really hurting her campaign and any momentum going forward, whether on the fundraising front or when it comes to media attention.
But Haley's not concerned. She's long said she hasn't been focused on Nevada after the state party chose to also hold caucuses, seen as more favorable to Mr. Trump, with his more loyal supporters more likely to show up.
We didn't spend a day or a dollar there. We weren't even worried about it. It's why we haven't talked about it.
Her campaign looking ahead to the contest to come, saying in a new statement, "We didn't bother to play a game rigged for Trump. We are full steam ahead in South Carolina and beyond." But before that election in South Carolina later this month comes Nevada's caucuses tomorrow, where former President Trump has campaigned and has predicted victory already, boosted by his backers pledging to show up.
I voted none of the above for the primary here, and I'll be at the caucus on Thursday.
I mean, like, what does that say to you, right? To a lot of analysts, this speaks volumes to the presence that Donald Trump still has within the Republican Party, because his name wasn't even on the ballot. But even with that disadvantage, a huge majority still chose to not even vote for any of the other names on it because they probably think that it's the lesser of the evil. Now, there's a chance that the majority of these voters that said that they weren't voting for any of these other names were Trump supporters. But that's just something I can't confirm without actual data. And just to show you guys how bad the turnout was, I believe there was around like 2 million voters in Nevada and only 200,000 showed up at the primaries. Like, how absolutely insane is that, right? Now, of course, we can say that this isn't that big of a deal, right? But it kind of shows just how tired some of us are, even though a lot hangs in the balance with these votes, especially if we look at the public's perception. But how about things on the other side? How were votes there? Well, President Biden, he grabbed nearly 90% of the folks who showed up, but 6,000 of them still chose none of these candidates, clocking in at 5%. Even among Democrats, there's a fair share of disapproval.
Well, the presidential preference primary is now over, but we have some results that we want to get to. No surprise, on the Democrat side, President Biden won here in the state. Take a look right here. We're going to bring this up full screen for you, give you a look at some of those numbers. You can see 89.3% to the next human, which was 2.9%. none of these candidates received about 5% of the vote. This really wasn't a surprise for us here when it comes to the Democratic side.
But let's talk about the numbers, shall we? So only 7% of voters bothered to show up. That's less than half of what we saw in the primaries back in 2020. And what happened back then that changed the game for everybody? Oh yeah, that's right. Mail-in ballots. Nearly half of the Democratic votes were mail-in ballots back then, which boosted the total numbers. Now, speaking of numbers, the Gallup poll found that only about 24% of Americans think most of these politicians deserve another shot. Now, this is lower than what we've seen in pretty much every recent presidential election, except for 2012 when it was a dismal 20%. Now, you would think that numbers like these would signal some kind of huge change for 2024, especially given how bad things have been in recent years, right? Wrong. Believe it or not, over 90% of those in the House and the Senate who went to re-election in 2020, they managed to hold on to their office. Now, is this just a case of like familiarity in the elections, or is it just plain luck? Well, that's up to the voters to decide. Now let's get over to the people, right? So over 100 million Americans who just don't bother showing up at the polls. They're fed up with both parties. It's kind of obvious to see that's the case here. So just take a look at the border issues that we've been having and how both parties can't seem to get along, right? Which kind of gets us back to square one, which is both Trump and Biden, as both of them are kind of pushing back at this bipartisan bill on opposite ends because its passing or failing will affect them politically. It makes you wonder if any of these people are actually working for the American people or just for themselves. But if you ask Vice President Kamala Harris, this is by far the most election. And no, I didn't make a mistake there. She actually said that this is the most election. Now, I'm pretty sure she meant to say that this is the most important, but aren't all of them? Now, some analysts question the longevity of President Biden, not within his life, of course, but within the Democratic Party. Will he still be leading the way come November? Or will Democrats go another route? Because Trump has been pushing to have him on a stage and have them both in a debate. Now, the question though is, what will they talk about? Because Biden says the borders not being safe is due to Trump telling Republicans not to sign off on a border deal, while Trump says that the borders are dangerous because of Biden himself. At the end of the day, Americans are likely going to get the same shtick all over again, the same arguments all over, and at the end of the day, chances are we'll get the same people running for the same office yet again. And the numbers show the exact same thing. I mean, look at this. It says that as of early February, President Joe Biden had a job approval rating of 40.7% with a dismal rating of 55.8%. Now, it's not his worst number, but we can't say that this is good. The same goes for Trump, as he got around 40.8% favorability according to the polling group, and he was found unfavorable at 54.5% of Americans in the same poll. Now, it's also being reported that 59% or more than half of the nation are either not too enthusiastic or not at all enthusiastic about a rematch between the two. Now, of course, voters can still switch things up by voting differently this time around, meaning that they're not going to vote for either Trump or Biden and instead opt to vote for any kind of independent, maybe a third party alternative to lead the nation. However, not many analysts or experts see that happening at all. But of course, even as Americans show their frustration by not showing up to vote, chances are that a good number of them will actually come out and vote for the usual menu of officials that they usually vote for. Maybe it's a bad habit, or maybe they're just hoping for the best this time around. I don't know. As far as I know though, I'll do my best to keep you guys posted and informed on everything that's going on around us that can impact us. So thanks for hanging out. Thanks for liking the video. Thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one.